Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today is it time for the NHL to revamp their salary cap. More of that and other NHL news coming at you right now. Guys, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, for all of our NHL content. And you can also check out our NFL, NBA, MLS, NCAA football, and wrestling content. I don't know why I was blanking on all the content we have. We have a lot of content. So while you're there, check it all out. Hit up our shop while you're there. Get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8 with some of the new designs up in the top left-hand corner there. You can check that out right there. And the MLS crew has been diving headfirst into previews, just like we were in the summertime. And you don't want to miss that. Go and check out the MLS coverage right now. It has been awesome over there. Bob and Alex have been doing a great job with that. And make sure that you follow us on Twitter at I80_sports NHL. And if you are currently following us already, thank you all so much, because we greatly value all of your support. And if you're on our website and you don't know about our YouTube page, here it is down below, youtube.com/I80 Sports, where right now, if you're here on YouTube and you're not currently subscribed, which you're most likely not, make sure you hit subscribe. Also, hit the bell for all the notifications and stuff like that. You probably got all the notifications for all the MLS content, which check that out. They're dropping it live every single time. So you definitely want to join the conversation live with the MLS crew. And who knows, whenever we go live, you're going to want to check out our content too. But I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And, while we're recording this now, maybe not while you're seeing it, it's Friday, so the week's over. So I'm doing better than I normally am.
Oh my gosh, I'm doing better than I normally am. It just, the past 2 weeks have felt like literal months. And it's good to be at the end of the week, and it's good to just kick back, watch some hockey. And while you're here, check out some NHL news. And we've got a little bit to dive into right now. So as usual, guys, it's time to hit up our traffic report. Here's some NHL news.
The I-80 Sports Traffic Report, where you can find all your news and notes from the week.
So once again, it was a bit of a quiet week in the NHL, but we did have one big thing happen, and it could be the catalyst for more things going on, because we are officially almost a month away from the NHL trade deadline, and we have had the first blockbuster trade of this season, and it's a bit of a doozy. So Montreal has started their fire sale early, and they have traded one of their leading scorers from last year, one of their leading scorers this year, even though he only has 9 goals. Montreal Canadiens have traded Tyler Toffoli to the Calgary Flames for a lottery-protected first-round pick this year. That's right, that is lottery-protected, which means that if Calgary somehow ends up with a top 10 draft pick, that first-round pick will actually be next year's first-round pick. I doubt that happens, though, so it's probably going to be a first-round pick this year. So they get a first-round pick for this year. They also get a 2023 fifth-round pick, prospect Emil Heineman, and NHL roster player Tyler Pitlick. Interesting note here. A lot of people thought that with Tyler Toffoli's contract going over to Calgary, that Calgary was going to need to make some room in their salary cap to make room for Tyler Toffoli and maybe cast off another player in a trade or a waiver move of some form. But Tyler Pitlick's contract was just enough to allow Calgary to not rework their roster. And more on salary cap issues later on in the episode. But it's time to ask the question, Tom. Who won this trade in your mind?
Well, you know what? It's like Montreal this year and everything they've done. They lost this trade. I'm going to say Calgary won it. They're adding a good bottom 6 option down there. You know, and one thing we've learned over the years with the playoffs, it doesn't matter how you play, whether you play with speed, whether you play with grit, whether you play a hybrid style, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you have in your top 6. What wins Stanley Cups? Depth wins Stanley Cups. You have to have the best depth to win the Stanley Cup. You just have to. Your depth players have to contribute, and Tyler Toffoli is a huge contributor in that depth area for Calgary. I think they won the trade. As we know, they're in the Pacific Division. If they want to get themselves to a cup or get themselves to a conference final, they will have to go through Vegas. And one thing that Vegas has had over the years, and I'm never one to toot the Vegas Golden Knights horns, but the one thing Vegas has had is depth. They always have had that depth. So I'm going to say Calgary won it. Emil Heineman and Tyler Pitlick's a so-so player. Emil Heineman, he's a second-round draft pick. I read up on his stats. I don't know if there's much to be excited about with that. First-round pick this year, okay, it'll probably be bottom end of the draft. Fifth-round pick, sometimes you get a gem in the fifth round. Sometimes you got a guy who never, ever plays. I got to go with Calgary on this one. It's just too obvious to me.
Honestly, I think this is a good deal on both sides. I absolutely see the argument on Calgary's, and I'm going to dive back into that in just a second. Montreal, though, I wouldn't necessarily say that the haul that they got was not a bad haul whatsoever. Actually, in this case, I think quantity in this case is actually going to be helpful. I mean, for those that kind of follow trade trees and things like that, I'm personally a big fan of TSN whenever Steve Dangle does the trade trees and just kind of going back and looking at particular trades. This could be a trade that we end up going back and looking at years from now and just seeing how it evolved. And just to put quite simply, I mean, if you're thinking about Tyler Toffoli in terms of value, just by this year, in terms of what he's done as a member of the Montreal Canadiens, his stats don't necessarily scream out a first-round pick in return. If you're looking at this, I think, Montreal essentially sold to the highest bidder. And getting a first-round pick in this deal is an absolute win. And I think Montreal is going to be certainly happy with this. I think with the new management that is currently in Montreal, I think they're really going to aim to retool this team, rebuild this team properly. And that first round pick goes a long way for that. Obviously, Tyler Pitlick, he's an NHL roster player that you can, insert in the roster right now and still stay competitive in some way, shape, or form. Emil Heineman, the record's still kind of, out on that one. We don't really know exactly what that's going to be until maybe a couple of years from now. The fifth round pick, that could be a gem. That could be just another AHL player. We're just going to have to see what happens there. It could also turn into something else in a trade later on. You never know. Now, on Calgary's side of things, I look at them and just think, playing devil's advocate, it's a decent pickup, but the amount that they gave up for a guy who is going to play in the bottom six, realistically, it's pretty steep when you think about it. Giving up a first-round pick, a fifth-round pick, an NHL rostered player, a prospect, it's a high-risk, high-reward type of play. But hey, it worked out for Tampa Bay, I guess. They made a similar move for Barclay Goodrow. It turned into 2 Stanley Cups. I mean, obviously, he wasn't the main reason why they won, but he was certainly a major reason why. And Tyler Toffoli, I think, could be in that same vein. So we're going to have to see how this works out for Calgary this year as they try to march forward into a playoff spot this year. And just like that, we are moving into our quick hits, as we always do before we get to our main topic of the day. First and foremost, a major congratulations to Sid the Kid, Sidney Crosby, scoring his 500th career goal this past week. And fun fact, 500th career goal, his 50th against the Philadelphia Flyers. Actually, I have this really weird stat already pulled up. Actually, I feel bad that I don't even have it immediately at the ready. It was his 500th NHL goal, his 50th career goal against the Flyers in the Penguins' 50th game of the season, and it also fell on Jaromir Jagr's 50th birthday. Just a lot of fives all around. It's just a useless stat, but you know what? Still kind of cool and still kind of eerie. We had a weird waiver claim this past week. So the Vegas Golden Knights placed Adam Brooks on waivers. And if you're wondering if that name's familiar from a previous episode, it is, because the Toronto Maple Leafs placed Adam Brooks on waivers earlier this season, and it was scooped up by the Vegas Golden Knights. So Vegas replaces Adam Brooks on waivers. The Toronto Maple Leafs claim him back off of waivers, and then the next day, the Toronto Maple Leafs place Adam Brooks on waivers. This poor guy is just in NHL purgatory right now. This guy is just in that in between, floating between. Am I an NHL player or am I going to the Toronto Marlies? What am I doing? Oh, I feel for this. It's just a wacky news story. I think he ultimately ends up with the Toronto Marlies, though. Next, the Minnesota Wild have placed Victor Rask on waivers again. Nashville head coach John Hines has been fined $25,000 for inappropriate comments made to referees after a game this past week. I still need to go and see and try to see if I can read lips there. Anybody who has it, certainly let me know. We alluded to Brad Marchand of the Boston Bruins being suspended last week, and it is official even after appeal. Brad Marchand tried to appeal this. It was ruled today that the suspension will be upheld. Brad Marchand has been suspended 6 games after just a flurry of things you cannot do to a goaltender. Like, how do you not know not to sucker punch Tristan Jarry? And his argument is just like, I didn't try to injure him. Then what were you trying to do? Just that train's never late. Brad Marchand, just a world of dumb there. Just a world of dumb. And this one will make Tom happy. The World Junior Tournament is set to restart, not continue, but restart officially in August. So that's going to be a lot of fun to monitor in the month of August, especially as we're conducting, team previews. Oh man, we're going to have to pull double duty with team previews and also regular episodes, aren't we? Oh no.
Yeah, unfortunately.
This is going to be a busy summer, but it's fine. Hey, more hockey is better than no hockey. That's the way I see it. But just like that, it's time to move on to our next interesting news story. And it's tough to go back down this road again, but hey, it's time, as always, to pump the brakes.
Not so fast. It's time to pump the brakes.
So, the NHL salary cap. There's a lot to unpack with this because you have teams that have benefited from kind of working around the rules of the NHL salary cap. Technically, what teams are doing is not technically illegal, but it has a lot of people kind of scratching their heads and thinking, why is this legal? So what am I alluding to here? So let's just start by stating facts. So new Vegas Golden Knights member Jack Eichel has officially made his Vegas debut on Wednesday night after recovering from spinal fusion surgery. And the discussion leading up to his debut was, what trade were the Vegas Golden Knights going to have to make room for Jack Eichel on the NHL roster? Because there was a lot of variables with Jack Eichel finally making his debut, because his contract would technically put the Vegas Golden Knights up over the allotted salary cap. So there was talks of, well, do we need a trade of Genny Dadonov? Do we need to trade Riley Smith? Do we need to trade Riley Smith? We probably need to trade Riley Smith. And probably Tom hoping Rangers. But even still, and me, I'm just thinking Devils. Discussion for a different day. And probably something that could happen down the line, but that's besides the point. But that being said, it's amazing what ends up happening. It's amazing how happenstance, just convenience of all things, the Vegas Golden Knights didn't end up needing to make a trade whatsoever, because lo and behold, they made room for Jack Eichel by placing their current captain, Mark Stone, on injury reserve for the foreseeable future. And it's interesting because Jack Eichel's contract is a little over $10 million, and it would have put the Vegas Golden Knights up over the salary cap by about $8 million. And Mark Stone goes on injury reserve, which means when a player goes on injury reserve, or even LTIR, long-term injury reserve, their contract is not counted against the NHL salary cap. So that means that Mark Stone's $9 million contract does not go against the salary cap while he is on injury reserve, which means that the Vegas Golden Knights are in cap compliance with Jack Eichel even still on the NHL roster. So this is what's known in the NHL as what's called circumventing the salary cap. Essentially, you are placing a player on injury reserve, no matter what the severity of the injury is, in order to make room for a player whose salary would normally take you over the NHL salary cap. And you might be thinking, where have I seen this before? It happened just last year with the Tampa Bay Lightning, with Nikita Kucherov being activated off of injury reserve right before the playoffs began last year. Now, here's an interesting tidbit that you may or may not know. In the Stanley Cup playoffs, players' salaries do not count against the salary cap. You do not need to worry about the NHL salary cap during the NHL playoffs. You do not need to worry about being cap compliant, which means that the Tampa Bay Lightning were able to get away with being about $5 to $8 million. I don't have the exact number of how much money they were over the salary cap during the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they were allowed to keep Nikita Kucherov on their NHL roster despite them not being in cap compliance. This could potentially happen this year with the Vegas Golden Knights if Mark Stone is ready to come back for the Stanley Cup playoffs. Could be likely, which would mean that they would still be $8 million over the NHL salary cap. So with this said, with this information presented, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about this. And I certainly encourage you guys to have a conversation down in the comments section below. We really love to hear from you guys in terms of what your thoughts are on this. I want this to be a roundtable discussion. Should the NHL and NHL Players Association consider modifying the salary cap rules so this does not happen again, especially if the Vegas Golden Knights somehow end up going on and winning the Stanley Cup this year? So, Tom, let's open it up with you. What kind of modifications can the NHL make to their salary cap, and what is the ultimate solution to this that you think?
Tell you the truth, I'm not sure what the solution is. If you really look at this, this is just one other ripple in the hard cap that was put in back in 2005. Before they were doing this, they were front-loading contracts. Ilya Kovalchuk and Marian Hossa come to mind. They would front-load the deals, so at the end of their deals, they would be basically paying them chump change so they'd have enough money to sign other players. That's obviously against the rules now. If you look into other leagues, you have ways of, not so much, you have ways of legally circumventing salary caps in other leagues. Two leagues come to mind in that sense, and that's the NFL and the MLS. The NFL has the franchise tag. Now, the franchise tag is you slap the franchise tag on one player that you have, and basically he doesn't count against the cap. You can give him as much money as he wants, and that's that. In the MLS, you have what they call a designated player. Same principle. You have 3 designated player spots per club. Of those 3 slots, you can pay those players as much money as you want and not get penalized for it. The other thing about those slots is this. In the MLS, if you choose not to use that slot, you can trade that DP slot to another team so they can insert a player into there. Here's the problem with this with the NHL. It's not going to work just because of the revenue inequality. If you go back to 2004, right before we had the lost season, just go back and look at what teams did in that era. The Rangers being one of them, stacking their team up with ridiculous contracts for ridiculous players and going nowhere. But look at what some other teams did in 2004. Go back and look at the rosters in 2004 of the Colorado Avalanche when you had Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, Teemu Selanne, Paul Kariya, Rob Blake, Adam Foote, Milan Hajduk, and Alex Tanguay, all on one team. Look at the Detroit Red Wings. Steve Yzerman, Brendan Shanahan, Brett Hull, Pavel Datsyuk. I mean,
Sergei Fedorov.
What's that? No, Fedorov wasn't there in 2004. He had already left Anaheim.
Oh, yeah, shoot. Yeah, he was already in Anaheim.
But they actually did have Steve Thomas, and they had one other player, Robert Lang. They brought Robert Lang in, just because we can bring Robert Lang in. Look at the Philly. I don't mean to ramble, guys, but I need you to understand what I'm saying here. Look at the Philadelphia Flyers in those playoffs. Jeremy Roenick, Keith Primo, John LeClaire, Mark Recchi, Tony Amonte. They had those 5. Go look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they were the biggest one, in my opinion. Joe Nieuwendyk, Ron Francis, Matt Sundin, Alexander McGillney, Gary Roberts, Brian Leach, you name them, they had them. Eddie Belfour, they had them. You look at those teams that loaded up like that. Now, obviously, it can't happen again. But if you were to stick a DP or a franchise tag into the NHL. And it was to be, especially it was like the MLS where you could trade DP slots, you're going right back to the same problem. And you have the big teams like the New York Rangers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Philadelphia Flyers, Detroit Red Wings, big markets, big market teams will be taking advantage of it all over again. And then you'll start seeing the little guys not able to compete. You know, one thing that baseball has is that luxury tax, which I guess is a little bit better, but at the same time, in baseball, there's not the revenue sharing, there's no cap. The luxury tax, it's the same thing. You know, you're asking a big team like the Rangers to pay a luxury tax where you have a smaller team like, say, the Ottawa Senators. They'll pay less of a luxury tax, but at the same time, the Rangers could pay that player and afford that luxury tax. At the end of the day, it doesn't work in hockey. And the reason it doesn't work in hockey is this. This league has more small market teams than anybody else does. You have 7 teams in Canada and 2 in Montreal and Toronto are viable big markets. And maybe Vancouver, you could argue, as a third big market. Then you have little teams like the Arizona Coyotes and the Nashville Predators who, I guess in reality, could compete. But back then, you know, there were a ton of problems too. There was one thing I read up on this year, and it was something, and I don't remember who came up with it, but it was a 5-year draft exemption. So basically, this is how it would work. If you have a player on your team that you have to have drafted him. So that doesn't mean that you can trade for the rights even before they play a game. No, they have to be drafted by the club. And they have to have played for the team at least 5 years. And it wasn't even a full exemption. It was a 25% exception on the salary, on the contract. That, I believe, works a little bit better. That works a little bit better. That, I think, may work if they were to try and do anything like this. I don't think they're ever going to do the we have to use the cap in the playoffs. It's never going to happen like that. It's just not going to happen. The 5-year draft exemption might be a starting point, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. The problem with this is that they put a hard cap in to prevent what happened in 2004. Now, granted, we don't have stacked teams like we had back then. We don't have the 2002 Detroit Red Wings and then everybody else trying to emulate them because they have the big pocketbooks and can pry players out of other cities. We don't have that. But at the same time, the competitive balance that they envisioned, where you have the parity every year, kind of like what the NFL has, we also haven't had. When we came out of that lockout, yeah, you had a small market team in Carolina win the Stanley Cup. Then you had a small market team in Anaheim win the Stanley Cup. Then who won the Stanley Cup? The team that they tried to kill, the Detroit Red Wings. Okay, then granted, you had the Pittsburgh Penguins win the Stanley Cup with Sidney Crosby, a team that was saved by the salary cap. But then after that, what happened? You pretty much had the Chicago Blackhawks and the LA Kings, with the exception of the Boston Bruins in 2011, basically splitting the cup every year. Now, granted, before the lockout, those teams were in bad shape, pretty much because they had absent-minded and moronic ownership. But at the same time, it doesn't matter whether it's hockey, whether it's football, whether it's baseball. Chicago and LA are the second and third biggest markets in the United States and North America, for that matter. So the real answer here is I'm not really sure, because obviously we didn't have what happened in 2004 when everybody stacked it up, but obviously you had teams, big market teams, that still found ways to win. You still found ways to win. And then reel off some other teams. Pittsburgh, you know, they're not a huge market, but they're a viable market. Pittsburgh won Stanley Cups. You know, you go down, St. Louis, big market, won the Stanley Cup. Boston in the picture every year. So they say this is here to help the small markets. But answer me this. Did this really help small markets? Outside of those 2 years where you had Edmonton and Ottawa in the finals against teams like Carolina and Anaheim, didn't really do anything. You had the Buffalo Sabres who came out of it in great shape with Briere and Drury. But what happened after 2007? Briere and Drury were gone because they couldn't afford to pay them anymore with a hard cap. And where did Briere and Drury go? Briere went to the Philadelphia Flyers. Drury went to the New York Rangers. Two big market clubs. So what I'll say is this. I'll harken back to that 5-year exemption rule. That may be a starting point. That may be a starting point, especially if you're a small market team and you draft guys coming in like, say, Shane Wright or Connor Bedard, and they're there with you for 5 years, and then you could cut them. You don't have to. It's not cutting the salary, as opposed to you can pay them a little bit better, and you don't have to worry about 25% of the salary. That's a building block. But the reality is, there's still a lot of work to do. I'll end it with a quote from a Megadeth song. If you ever heard the song Peace Sells, if there's a new way, I'll be the first in line, but it better work this time.
A lot of really good points made by Tom. And one thing that is for sure is there's not many options here. There's not a lot of options for the NHL to explore, but there at least needs to be a brainstorming session to at least get the conversation started. At least throw darts at a dartboard, see what darts end up falling to the ground, see what ends up kind of sticking to the board, and seeing how close you can kind of get to the target. You got to be solution based. You can't just isolate the problem and then just focus on the problem, focus on the solution. And you can't just have the full salary count for the guys who are out for a substantial amount of time. If that were the case, the Montreal Canadiens would be even more screwed than they already are this year. Let's just, keep that straight. If they still had to count Carey Price's and Shea Weber's contracts this year, they'd be even more screwed than they currently are. They probably wouldn't have even won a game. But there are definitely some solutions out there that I think the NHL and the NHL Players Association would be in their best interest to at least explore and see how viable they are. A lot of what Tom mentioned above are those viable options. I think the 5-year exemption program at a 25% rate or 25% off rate is a good starting point. I think that's a good place to at least start the conversation. But there could also be some hybrid models. Tom mentioned before one of my favorite sports. I always say that one of my biggest loves is hockey, but my first love was baseball. And the MLB does something with their injuries and the way they designate injuries that is a little bit more in depth, because they have the disabled list, the DL, if you will. There's the 10-day DL, there's the 60-day DL. And no matter what, you can bring up a player from the minors when somebody hits the 10-day DL or hits the 60-day DL. Now, obviously, in the MLB, salary cap is an absolute joke. I mean, just salaries in general. You have guys that make an astronomical amount in baseball, hence why there's a current lockout, because, the billionaires who pay those salaries are probably the most incompetent bunch of people. You know what? I'm not even going to dive into that one. I'm just going to open old wounds for myself. But even still, there is maybe a hybrid model that the NHL could at least adopt when determining what would be circumvention and what is not circumvention. And I think it starts with designating players for injury for particular reasons. If you have a guy that's going to be out only on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis, get a 10-day DL. Have part of that salary count towards the salary cap. Have like 50% of the salary count towards it at that time. That could at least be one place to start. And then if you have a guy that's going to be out for more than a week, maybe close to a month, have the IR system that you currently have now, where they are out a substantial amount of time. Because right now you have teams that are abusing IR. Nikita Kucherov is one of those classical examples and classic examples of abusing the IR in general and LTIR. LTIR should be meant for players such as Ben Bishop, who just recently announced his retirement, Shea Weber, who is likely to announce his retirement. That is more for players that very likely have played their last game in the NHL. It shouldn't be for a guy that's only going to be out maybe 2 to 3 months. There needs to be a better system in place where part of their salary is still responsible by the club itself. And the club is still responsible for paying a percentage of that salary, which might make teams think twice when putting these larger contracts on IR. and thinking about the moves that they have to make in turn. And just like Tom said before, something like that would at least help the smaller market teams survive in the NHL. And don't get it twisted. The smaller market teams right now, they are surviving. I mean, except if you're the Arizona Coyotes who are moving into a 5,000 person stadium. And if that doesn't work out, your grandma's basement might be next. But think about what the playoffs have looked like the past few years. The teams that have kind of dominated the NHL playoffs in the Stanley Cup picture. Tampa Bay is not a small market team by any stretch of the imagination. I know a lot of people will like to think that because they're just like, oh, it's warm in Tampa Bay. It can't be a large market. It's a huge market. Vegas, brand new team. That's a large market. What does it mean for teams like Seattle? What does it mean for teams like New Jersey, for Pittsburgh, and to some lesser extents? For your Arizonas, for your I'm just already blank Minnesotas. What does it mean for those smaller market teams that have a little bit more difficulty? I think adopting a hybrid method such as this would at least help those teams have a fighting chance when negotiating free agency deals, when negotiating trades, when negotiating to just make their team more competitive to get into that Stanley Cup contending situation. I just really want to see some form of change, and I want to just see the arguments kind of go away of like, well, this team would not have won if, or this team would have won if. There's always going to be would have, could have, should have. And, ultimately what Tampa Bay did last year doesn't break the rules technically. What Vegas is doing right now doesn't break the rules, but it doesn't mean that the rules, can't be changed. That's the whole point of rules. Rules are meant to kind of bend. Rules are meant to adapt based on the times. And right now it might be just about that time where things might need to be revamped a little bit. Because as it stands right now, this current method is not fully working. And if Vegas wins the Stanley Cup this year, this will be yet another year that brings up the very difficult discussion of circumvention and circumventing the NHL salary cap. And something that Gary Bettman fought so hard to implement and the owners fought so hard to implement in 2004, 2005. You don't want teams to start abusing that and making it into a joke, because then that defeats the whole entire purpose of that entire lockout from 15 plus years ago at this point. More of a joke than it already is, but even still. All right. We've had quite the discussion on this, but we'd also love to hear from you guys down below. Join the conversation down below. We can certainly revisit this topic, down the line, and we'd love to hear from you guys, maybe even making it into a little bit of a Q&A and, open discussion for later on. So comment down below. Let us know what you guys think of our possibilities, and we want to hear about your possibilities too. Maybe we can reopen this wound somewhere down the line. Once you guys comment down below, we'd love to hear from you guys down below. Did I mention the comment section? Yeah. Comment. We want to hear from you guys. All right. It's time to move on. Time to start wrapping things up as a whole. And we already know that once we get to this point, we got to talk about some of the high performers from this past week. So let's talk high performance.
Your I-80 Sports High Performance Players of the Week.
So we're talking players of the week right now. Tom's going to highlight some people, and why do I also feel like he's going to highlight a Ranger here? So, Tom, who are your players of the week?
Honorable mention, Keandre Miller, shootout winner against the Bruins. Nice wraparound against the Red Wings last night, even though they lost. And it's more or less just kind of a gut punch at some fellow Ranger fans who keep calling this guy a bum. He's not a bum. The fans of this team cannot be patient, and it bothers me. And I'm trying not to rant too much, but it's like literally, it's these same people who treat 1994 like, and I don't want to compare it to the rival Islanders, but they seem to think 1994 is the same thing as winning 4 Stanley Cups in a row. And they go out there and they trash on guys like Miller, and they trash on guys like Kakko, and they trash on guys like Lafreniere. It drives me up a wall. Miller's playing great. Lafreniere last night was a beast out there. Maybe he didn't score a goal, but he was looking like the Alexis Lafreniere from the World Juniors 2 years ago. So, yeah, that's my honorable mention, Keandre Miller. I never, ever pick goalies in this, and now it seems like the last few weeks, I just keep picking them. Jacob Markstrom of the aforementioned Calgary Flames, 5 wins in a row for the Flames, including 1 shutout. The guy who Vancouver gave up on, to harken back to last week. For some reason, these Calgary Flames love picking up ex-Vancouver Canucks. I don't know why.
Yeah, and just to go back to that point, I mean, Jacob Markstrom has been fantastic. And welcome to the dark side of highlighting goalies. Welcome to that dark side. I've been highlighting
Like I said,
goalies
it's
all
just I was
year.
never a goalie growing up. So it's like I watch hockey. Believe me, I watch more hockey than I probably should. But I don't know anything about being a goalie. I played every position but goalie.
That's fair. I do think that this is kind of the year of the goalie because there are at least 5 goalies I can think of off the top of my head that could be contending for that Vezina trophy towards year's end. There's Igor's up there. Yes, he is. But like surprising players to me, like Markstrom is up there for me. Tristan Jarry is a guy that's going to be, in the talks. And then there's the usual suspects. Andrei Vasilevsky is going to be in that conversation this year, of course. Goaltenders have just really been killing it this year in the NHL. That being said, the goal totals have not gone down by any stretch of the imagination, but some goalies are doing really well. Others are not doing so well. Mackenzie Blackwood, here's looking at you anyway. But for me, I've got a couple players I'm going to mention here, and I'm going to keep it Canadian here. Blake Wheeler, first and foremost, of the Winnipeg Jets. This past in 6 games, 12 points, 3 goals, 9 assists, racking up the assists as he normally does. He's just an assist machine, dishing out to all of his players. And who's he been dishing it to the most lately? Mark Scheifele. Mark Scheifele in the past 6 games, 7 goals in 6 games, 11 points total in those 6 games. Fantastic. You even have like a former Winnipeg Jet that's also doing well in Columbus right now, Patrick Laine. 5 games played, 10 points total, 6 of them goals. Well done. But the other player I wanted to highlight here, Matt Tkachuk, I just lost my notes here. 5 games in 5 games of action from this past week and a half. 9 points, 3 of which are goals. 1 goal of which you need to go back and watch from last week. It was a highlight. I forget against who, but he scored this bananas goal last week. It was a goal of the year type candidate. Matt Tkachuk is just man, I love watching a guy like him play because the aforementioned, Calgary Flames, that top line is something scary lately, man. That top line might be one of the best in hockey of Matt Tkachuk, Elias Lindholm, and Johnny Gaudreau. That's just, they're, pissing on all cylinders right now. They're just doing really, really well. Really, really well. But it's time to wrap up this episode as we always do. It's time for our question of the day. Time to go back to talking a little bit about Vegas here. And the question here is simple. With the addition of Jack Eichel, are the Vegas Golden Knights Stanley Cup favorites? Tom, what do you think?
No, and for 2 reasons. And I know I said before I wasn't going to rant, but now I might rant a little bit.
Oh, boy.
Number 1, Jack Eichel. Good player. Yes. Very good player. Yes. Finally sort of living up to his potential his last years in Buffalo where he was getting over a point per game. How many minutes of playoff hockey has Jack Eichel played in his career?
Yeah, good point.
Where did Jack Eichel play before he came to the NHL?
Very good point. Sorry, Frozen 4 guys.
No, not before Vegas, before the NHL. Boston University, college hockey. You play 1 game playoff in college hockey. 1 game. Jack Eichel, and I'm going to say this about him, and Brian, I know I'm going to say it again. I'm going to sound like a broken record here. These good American players who are coming up, who know that they're going to go to the NHL, who it's not a doubt in their mind. They know they're going high in the draft. They know they're going right to the league. Why do you stay in the United States? Why do you play college hockey in his case? In another Jack's case, Jack Hughes, why do you play for the National Team Development Program? Now, yes, Hughes has been better this year. Jack Hughes' father said, well, if we could do it again, we'd do 1 year of college. Answer me this. How would that have helped? How would that have helped? Especially Hughes, where he lived. But we're not talking about Jack Hughes. We're talking about Jack Eichel. Why did Jack Eichel not go to Canada as a team and play juniors, where it's more of a professional schedule, where you're playing in those 7-game series? I don't know how Vegas fans are. I don't know if they're cutthroat like Ranger fans are. But I'm telling you, Jack Eichel goes, and I use a baseball term, 0 for the century in that first round, has maybe 1 assist in however many games. They're going to be crucifying him in Vegas. They are. They are. The guy has zero playoff experience, and maybe I'm not saying this. I'm not saying Canadian junior hockey in the CHL same thing as Stanley Cup playoffs. It's not. But the similarity there is this: is that there you play when you get to the playoffs, you play best of 7 series. Eichel's never even played a best of 7 series in his career, let alone a freaking playoff game. I'm sorry. He's a good player, but you're expecting a guy who's never played playoff hockey anywhere to lead you to a Stanley Cup? I'm sorry. I can't sit here in confidence and say that that makes them a cup favorite. Here's another problem I want to harken on, and it's a rumor that's been going around, and I don't know how true it is. Yeah, it could be BS for all I know. Now they want to bring back Marc-Andre Fleury, the guy who they won a Vezina and they told to take a hike so they could put Robin Lehner in, a guy who led them yet again to another conference final last year. So now they want to bring this guy back. Okay, that's all good and nice. You want to bring him back, get him out of Chicago, get him a chance at a cup. Okay, but let's put them in this situation with their overly aggressive managing style over in Vegas. What happens if Marc-Andre Fleury comes back to Vegas and gets hurt, whether it's regular season or playoffs? Then you're putting Lehner back in net, and we know how Robin Lehner has talked about his treatment of certain teams and how teams treat their players. So now you're going to get this guy, Robin Lehner, who's a little bit of a known nutcase in the way he's treated, and you're going to put him back in net and say, oh, well, we pretty much told you to go screw yourself a couple of weeks ago. But here, go back in net and win us the Stanley Cup, and you're going to expect a full-on effort out of him? Give me a break. Give me a break. Colorado Avalanche are still Stanley Cup favorites. I watched that game the other night. You said it last year yourself that Vegas had more of that depth and more of that defensive style hockey, and Colorado played 2 run and gun. Well, I watched Colorado suck the life out of that team and that crowd the other night. And if Colorado brings in either Claude Giroux and or Marc-Andre Fleury, then Colorado, instead of being a most likely Stanley Cup favorite, becomes a definite Stanley Cup favorite. It's still the Colorado Avalanche to me.
Yeah. It's kind of tough to say. I think ultimately the Vegas Golden Knights are in that conversation now. I think they're certainly up there, and barring any more moves, they could certainly be a team that could be the team making it to the Stanley Cup final from the West. But just as Tom mentioned before, they still got to get past the Colorado Avalanche. And depending on how the Colorado Avalanche handled their trade deadline, picking up either Claude Giroux or Marc-Andre Fleury, or somehow both, or neither, Colorado could be that favorite team as of right now.
I'm sorry, I want to just say one more thing, and I don't mean to cut you off. Colorado has that loss last year fresh in their minds.
Very fresh. It's a fresh wound for sure. And Colorado has certainly had a year to kind of reflect on it as well. Whether that changes things, who knows? But, playoffs are a different animal. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is, well, if Vegas circumvents the cap, they not only have Jack Eichel, but they also have Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty all on the same top line. Now, obviously, you can't run your top line all game, but it certainly helps to have. Look at Calgary right now with the line that I mentioned before. Still up there in that conversation. But you know what? This is why the games are played. This is why these playoff games are played ultimately. We're just going to have to see, we're going to have to see what happens. But
not for nothing, man. I'll take Nathan McKinnon over Jack Eichel any day of the week.
I mean, I will too, but that's no argument from me. I mean, I'd rather take the guy with the spine rather than the artificial spine.
True enough.
Yeah, just saying. That's not a dig at Jack Eichel. I don't want him bad mouthing me. God forbid he actually ever sees this, if he does. But even still, guys, what do you guys think down below? We want to hear from you guys, just like I mentioned from you guys, especially with our conversation from earlier in this episode. We hope that you guys already sounded off down below. But hey, if you haven't, sound off down below. We want your opinions as well. And while you're down there, drop a like. And also, if you're not subscribed already, subscribe. We come out with an episode once a week, so you definitely don't want to miss it. But in case you're not here on YouTube, in case you're looking for our content elsewhere, make sure that you find us down on our website down below, i80sports.com, for not only our NHL content, but also our NFL, MLS, NCAA football, NBA, and wrestling content as well. While you're there, hit up our shop, get yourself something with that nice, sweet logo in the top left-hand corner right-hand corner of your screen. I suck with directions, but even still, get yourself a t-shirt with that logo on there, or even a beanie, or even something else. Get yourself something sweet like that as we roll into the spring, finally getting some warmer weather. And t-shirts are there as low as $8. Be looking fine, fresh, and spiffy heading into allergy season. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at I80_SportsNHL. And if you are currently following us, thank you guys so much, because we greatly value all of your support. Without you guys, we can't do this on a weekly basis. But hey, once again, time to move away from this. Time to watch some hockey right now. Happy hockey weekend, and happy President's Day weekend as well. For those that have a long weekend, enjoy, take a day off, treat yourself. We need a little bit of self-love every once in a while. But guys, as usual, I'm Brian. He's been Tom. This has been yet another episode of NHL on I80 Sports.